Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is Fergus Hodgson with the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you want to go to the archives, you can always find our show, goldnewsletter.com/podcast. We have a fascinating guest today. I recently met him at an event in Houston, Texas. He is Wayne Christian. He is the Texas Railroad Commissioner, and he's been in that position since November 2016. He was unanimously re-elected this year. He served 14 years in the Texas Legislature, and prior to that, he held a career in banking and finance. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Honored to be with you today.
I was just so pleased to see an elected official this was an Adam Smith Society event promoting free enterprise. And I saw another interview with Wayne where he explained that he promotes safety for the public. Also, he wants to see the industry functioning fluidly, let's say, or at its maximum. One thing that caught my attention at his presentation here in Houston was that there is simply the largest oil discovery in U.S. history here in Texas, and I wanted him to explore that and share why this is so important, both economically, geopolitically. There are lots of elements to this. So would you mind just clarifying what is this discovery and what has happened since it was first came to attention in late 2016?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. As I shared with you when we met down at Houston, it was kind of a lot of fun. The day after I was elected in November, the Tuesday in November, you have election day, general election.
Yes.
I was elected railroad commissioner that day. The next day, the newscast announced the largest find of oil and gas in the history of the world in Midland, Texas. And I thought it was a lot of fun kind of to play at least one part of Donald Trump's message when he took credit for finding 1,000 jobs for Carrier air conditioning. I thought, well, golly, I can go down and claim that I found the largest amount of gas in the history of the world my first day in office. So it was a lot of fun. But seriously, what you're talking about there is literally that's what happened. And at the time they found that was in West Texas. Some of it goes over into New Mexico, and it's the Permian Basin and a couple of basins there that kind of combine together. But it's just basically West Texas and part of New Mexico.
Okay.
Originally, at that time, the total amount that they estimated was around 20 billion barrels of oil and large sums of natural gas, which was the largest find at that time.
Right. Since
that time, the projections, since they've gone in there, they're through now 3 of the 7 shells, which are layers out there in the current basins, and the total went up to 48 billion barrels. Now, you contrast that at that time, the entire amount of oil available to the United States, Alaska through Brownsville, at that particular moment was 40 billion barrels. And for us to have found 48 billion in West Texas was phenomenal. That's more than we had even before in resources. Then I go out there again and look on the charts, and it's back up to the Railroad Commission has it at 68 billion barrels. So I'm out at an event in West Texas about a month and a half ago, and an older gentleman that's been in the oil and gas business for decades said, Wayne, I've had a couple of my friends that have been in the business forever said by the time we get through all 7 shells, we're looking at over 200 billion barrels of oil. And so I then the next week go to Houston, where I was there with you, met with the owner of an oil and gas company there, and his board of directors were in the meeting. And I mentioned that this gentleman in West Texas had said it was up to 200 billion, said, oh, you're wrong. And they gave me the current estimate, and the charts to go with it is at 230 billion barrels of oil, which is absolutely insane. This is more oil than has ever been found on planet Earth. And, of course, the challenge and why I appreciate to be with Adam Smith Society is you have the free market democratic system here, republic, where we can compete in a free market. But if you have something, and the governor of Alaska had an event, I was there with the Energy Council about 2 months ago, stated normally we in business and all don't like to talk politics, but he says right now there's only one problem, one threat to the oil and gas industry, and that is political. Yes. Because you have one political party that's saying, keep it in the ground. You've got about 5 states. And I'll tell you where the example boils out in that is New Mexico. I mentioned to you that New Mexico has a large portion of this 200 billion barrels. They're right on the border there with these basins. Their governor was elected is of the Democratic Party and immediately started to fire the director of oil and gas that had been there for a long time. He now is the EPA director for 5 states appointed by Trump.
Okay.
They replaced it with a young lady, lack of experience, and their land commissioner in Oklahoma, which is the only statewide elected regulator, has already outlawed all disposal wells in the state. So you have, because of the political leadership, this wonderful example right next door to Texas, where the largest find in the history of the world is politically being stifled the best they can. And it just somewhat borders on insanity to me.
This is exactly why I wanted to have you on, because you are intimately familiar with those challenges. And my follow-up question was going to be, when you meet with these board members here in Houston, what are their chief concerns? You're telling us that they see an unstable, unpredictable regulatory environment, not on account of your position, but on other states and the federal government?
Well, exactly. Their concern right now, number one, is financing out of Wall Street and out of the banks and industry. As being a financial planner, that's kind of my bailiwick of expertise. And what's happened, there are a couple of things. When I meet with their board, they had their representative out of Wall Street, and he said, hey, because of this flaring issue, the negative press has started, and we've started having mutual funds that only invest in non-fossil fuel investments. So the dollar is being reduced available for new exploration in oil and gas. Secondly, because, again, as the governor of Alaska said, politics are an uncertainty, and uncertainty dissuades people from investing. So until there's some stability, which I guess is looking toward the next election of who's going to be in control,
right.
If you put a keep-it-in-the-ground president in that office, well, the long-term returns of oil and gas are not near as profitable and good for investment. So right now, the investment portfolio has shrunk to potential drillers. Now, what that's shifted to is now your big mega oil and gas companies, the big international companies, have a hands up because they've got their own financing. They got the historically dollars to work with. Whereas now your independents out in the Permian Basin, West Texas, are sitting here short of capital to continue their exploration. And so the big boys are starting to buy out some of those independents, which I'd rather see a lot of competition than I had just the big boys running the whole package. And that's kind of, I think, a negative that's occurring right now because of the lack of financing.
One thing that shocked me when I heard you speak was that you mentioned that even in the Texas Legislature, there is only a thin majority favoring extraction. What is that majority that you're clinging to in Texas?
Well, it's just political again, as we said in the start. And this, I hate to keep bringing up politics, which is uncomfortable many times, but it is applicable here. Because the party that's for keeping it in the ground, dissuading the production, moving to alternative energy, and we can talk about whether that's good or bad or sideways.
Sure.
But to not utilize this largest discovery of oil and gas is the Democratic Party. And in Texas itself, we're 9 votes out of 150 short in the Texas House of Representatives, in the Texas Capitol, not the U.S. Congress, the Texas government. We're 9 votes short of surrendering control from Republican to Democrat. If the Democrats take control, it's not just a one-session thing. The big threat is this is redistricting year, which means they draw the federal and state maps for the next decade for the state of Texas. So if you allow that political party at this time to take 9 seats in the Texas legislature more, and by the way, they won 11 last election, so the trend is on their side. If they win that and they draw the map for the next 10 years, I will not see after Donald Trump another Republican president in my lifetime because the presidency requires the Republican Party, Texas and Florida, to have enough votes to win the presidency on the average. And so there's this big a threat, 9 votes in the Texas legislature, which few people pay close attention to, can literally shut down the United States from having a president that's pro-oil and gas and not for keeping it in the ground.
But does it fall strictly along party lines? Are there some members of the Texas legislature who go the other way? Let's say some Democrats who would be on your side and some Republicans against you?
Sure there are. And there's Henry Cuellar in Washington, former Texas legislator, that is pro-oil and gas, definitely. Yes. But what you're seeing up there is the majority really is not controlling. You see the little lady in New York City and that bunch of extremists, the new members, freshman members, are controlling a political party right now, are leading a lot of the radicalization. And every one of these folks, Joe Biden, who's been there forever, on down, are raising their hands to keep it in the ground, not because it's the right thing to do, because politically they're having to go to their left side, more liberal side of their party, which has declared that oil and gas is something evil and corrupt in the world. And so it's not logical, it's not scientific. This is almost a religion where it's by this just emotional vote-getting tirade that every presidential candidate of one party at the CNN 7-hour debate on climate change all raised their hands and said they were for keeping it in the ground. You have the state of New York. You have 5 states, New York, California, one other Northeast state. Of course, Colorado tried to. New Mexico is dissuading oil and gas. And all of these are moving toward keeping it in the ground, and every one of them are controlled by the Democratic Party. And so that's the danger of putting Texas in that seat. And I mean, there's nothing, let me make it clear, there's nothing perfect about the Republican Party. That's not the issue as oil and gas regulator I'm debating right now. I'm saying this is an unusual situation where one of the main issues, partisan-wise, is oil and gas. And right now, with 200 billion barrels, the largest amount we've had, I mean, the history of this thing is unreal. If you just a second give me real quick, I'll give you why I think it's so important. World War I, Eastland County, Texas, and the Roaring Ranger production was essential to the Allied victory. When the armistice was signed in 1918, a member of the British War Cabinet declared, the Allied cause floated to victory upon a wave of oil. And that was out of Ranger, Texas oil field back in 1917. You move to World War II, 7 of the 8 billion barrels of oil to win the war came from the United States. Much was transported by the Big Inch and Little Inch pipeline out of Kilgore, Texas, the East Texas oil fields. It was the largest oil field in history at the time. Winston Churchill, at the end of the war, said that the war was won on a sea of East Texas oil. And I just want people to understand historically how oil and gas played a part from Texas. And now we're sitting here today, 2019, with 200 plus potential barrels of oil, the largest amount in the history of the world. And while we call the generation of World War II the greatest generation because they responsibly used that and responsibly did the right thing, what are they going to say about us in the future? You know, we have our chance right now, and are we going to turn it over to the keep in the ground folks and not even use this new oil as our forefathers have in World War I, World War II? Because this is national security that a lot of people understand. We no longer, because of this oil, if we use it correctly, and gas, have to send our best and brightest, our young people, overseas to the Persian Gulf or to make sure we get the Suez Canal, keep the access to the energy over there. And we don't have to fight and die anymore because we'll have the oil here. We become an exporter. So it's a big issue that I think a lot of people are not aware of how important it is to our national security.
The Gold Newsletter podcast is proudly sponsored by the Discovery Group of Exploration and Development Companies. To learn more about our exceptional track record and exciting future, visit discoverygroup.ca.
Hi, this is Brian London, and I'm here with Jim Paterson, the CEO of Valor Metals, that symbol VO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Jim, despite the big moves we've seen in the platinum group metals, there aren't many platinum group plays in the junior mining sector, and Valor is not only one of the few, but one of the best. I know that you're about to release a shareholder letter that will summarize some of the exciting events of the last year and what's going to happen at the company in just a few months ahead. Could you talk to us a bit about that?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Brian. Yeah, absolutely. So we're just sort of putting the finishing touches on the penmanship for a shareholder letter that will come out near the end of this year. And in that shareholder letter, I just sort of touch on what we did in 2019. So earlier in the year, we completed a rights offering. We restructured the company. And really the purpose of that was to put the company in a position where we could leverage the power that we have as Discovery Group, and Valor is a Discovery Group company that has access to first-class professionals and really high-quality deal flow. We've got access to capital to finance our activities, and we wanted to take advantage of that with a well-structured vehicle. So we accomplished that. And then actually we completed a transaction. We went after this Pedra Branca asset that was held by an AIM-listed company called Jingada. We closed that mid-year on August 14th. With that, we put out what we would consider a fairly conservative resource number in the 43-101 category, a little over 1 million ounces inferred. That the average grade is 1.22 PGM gold equivalent. We think that there's a lot of room for upside there, but we wanted to start with a conservative number. Then we went to work in terms of putting together the right team to evaluate a very significant database that had been generated by previous owners of that project. Estimates are that they probably spent in excess of $35 million generating data, drilling, geophysics, soil sampling, stream set sampling, mapping. So it was kind of in, let's just say, different silos, let's say, and we had to go through that and comb it. So we put together an amazing team of consultants and employees to work on that. And I would put our team head to head with any team for this type of project globally. We just have a lot of very bright minds and great experience, which they've done an amazing job of combing through that data and really identifying some pretty, we think, amazing opportunities for resource expansion and also property-wide exploration targets. What they also did is really came up with an exploration methodology that we thought would work. And in fact, we've actually proven in one case anyways that it has.
Yeah, you recently put out a news release about that, right? That methodology was validated immediately right out of the gate? I mean, within 24 hours?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. So we announced that December 4th, and just the crux of that news release that came out December 4th is that we had a very experienced geophysicist that looked at one of the deposits that forms part of our resource, and that's called Kuru. And it's well drilled off, and it has a certain geophysical signature, and he was looking for something that looked like that. So he identified a number of targets, but one of them that he identified also independently was identified or picked by Sandra Perry, who is handling a worldview technology for us, which is effectively satellite imagery that can identify rock types. So she independently came up with her own pick. He came up with his pick, and we actually sort of put that together. We got that information on a Wednesday afternoon. The guys were in the field. They drove to that target the next morning, ambled up the hill and started collecting rock samples, which we sent off to a lab in Canada. And then the results we put out December 4th, a little over almost 8 grams per ton.
Wow.
PGM gold equivalent. So, we nailed it basically. And we've got plenty more targets exactly like that, where we'll be kind of using these independent picks from these different data sets from these experts to help us with our discovery pipeline. And that would sort of be independent of resource expansion. But what we really like as a group and a company is the upside that's generated through exploration. So we are pretty jazzed. So that was quite a successful end to the year and proof that the exploration methodology works.
Yeah, so to kind of recap then, the two experts came up with their list of targets independently, and where they overlapped, you went to one of those or picked one of those where they overlapped, and it's a greenfields target. Went there, sampled, and got high grade right off the bat.
Yes. That is what happened. And it was, that particular target, when the guys went there, they actually saw some evidence that, other previous exploration groups had potentially been on the ground there in years past, but that was not in our database that we received. So it was sort of the database that we had. So it was completely a greenfield discovery, but it was validated by our own rock samples. So, we were quite excited about that. But you're right in your summation of what happened.
Well, that really bodes well for resource expansion because you're coming out of the gate again with over 1 million ounces of PGM resource at very good grades and conservatively estimated. So I guess what does the next year hold in terms of trying to expand that resource?
Well, subject to final sort of drill hole planning, the team was on site in December to really go through and actually identify the best drill targets for resource expansion, and then look at those targets within the context of access and roads and permitting and everything else. So subject to the receipt of permits and financing, we'll be off to the gate with what we hope is a pretty substantial drill program, and then supplement that with more things like CO4, which would be discoveries and really kind of starting to take advantage of that discovery pipeline we have. So we will, sometime before the end of January, we'll have a very clear plan that we release to the market, that what we hope to execute on. But the main part is, as you said, we're starting with a great foundation with the existing resource. We've got lots of exploration upside. We've got a really amazing team that's in charge of helping us in both those cases.
And again, in an area of PGMs where there are few competitors, few options for investors, so all of the money that's interested in that sector has very few options and will tend to flow into only those few options. So you're really going to get a lot of attention from the market. And again, Jim, you're going to have that shareholder letter on the website, I assume, so people can get a full update on the company, where it's come from, and its plans on that link, at that link on the website.
Absolutely. Within the next week or so, that will be out.
Well, Jim, thank you so much. As a shareholder personally in Valor from long ago, I'm looking forward to the next few months and year. It seems like you're going to have great news flow to deliver to the market, and you have a lot of opportunity directly ahead of you that should be very beneficial to shareholders. Thanks again for your time, Jim.
Thanks, Brian. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and the best in 2020 for you.
Same to you.
How do you respond to the fears, right? The fears of environmental degradation on account of this extraction?
Well, I think a lot of it we should be concerned. The Railroad Commission is to keep it clean. In fact, we did a study 2017 in December. We're going to get you a copy, anybody,
Yes.
that showed people worried about water. They're worried about water by the Railroad Commission. And we studied over 15,000 disposal wells and injection wells that shoot water back into the ground, the used water, because people were concerned about drinking water. And after all those 10 years' time, we could not identify any drinking water that had been contaminated by oil, gas production, nor secondary sources of it. So by fact, hadn't been done. Now, the fear you get out there, and the reason is the exploration, all of the injection of these fluids from oil and gas operations are hundreds of thousands of feet below the drinking water level. But that's being used, and many times falsely, by those folks that don't want oil and gas. And secondly, you talk about other causes of degradation of the environment. In fact, EPA, great stat, EPA since 1970, every one of the poisonous gases identified by EPA has been reduced in the United States by 73%. And that's with a 60% increase in usage of equipment, population, and more use. So we've decreased. And the United States, by the way, is the cleanest industrialized nation on planet Earth. In other words, if you want to make the planet clean, what you use is what has worked. And what has worked is the technology developed by the oil and gas industry to clean up the environment. A big example I give folks that live in Texas is we used to have smog alerts in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and you would see the smog 10 years ago in days they would ask people with asthma and other diseases to stay inside. Today it's clear we have pollen alerts, but we don't have smog alerts. Did those just disappear? No. The productive oil and gas industry had filtration technologies that cleaned it up. And if you want to make the world a cleaner place, you don't export non-proven industries to clean it up. You export oil and gas technology that has been developed in the United States that has made the United States, by fact, the cleanest environment on planet Earth.
That's one of the ironies that I hear often from Canada, that some of the politicians want to shut down extraction in Canada, and yet at the same time they're importing from all these third world countries with disastrous records. So I hear that, and although I recently listened to a presentation from the University of Chicago discussing how when there have been problems, some of the firms will basically shut up shop and avoid liability through LLCs or different companies that can easily declare bankruptcy. Are you familiar with that concern? Even if you think it's a red herring?
No, it's definite. We've wound up, specifically the area you can use an example in Texas, are abandoned oil wells.
Okay.
These companies would incorporate, and of course, after they got as much oil out of the ground as they could and couldn't produce anymore, they would just declare bankruptcy, leave, and you'd have to have a plugging program to clean up the abandoned wells in the state of Texas, and that's where that happens is the Railroad Commission.
Okay.
We go into and we plug thousands of these abandoned wells. We go in there. Number one, we list them in order, which are more dangerous to the environment. Some of them are just doing nothing, so they're not a threat to anything, but we put them on the list to plug. Then the legislature came in Texas and passed a bill for us that says basically if you're ever a member of one of the board of directors of any of these organizations go bankrupt, you can never be a member of a board of directors or an organization that drills for any oil or any type of processing of oil or gas in the state of Texas. So we reduced tremendously by law those people that would just have a corporation, go busted, reorganize, and go over here and start drilling again. And that was a threat. So we went through that. We passed some laws in Texas. So it's not totally cured. Nothing ever will be. But the bad actors are the ones you have government for. We in the Railroad Commission, as the elected officials, our job is to keep the environment clean, make sure that the access to energy is profitably and cleanly done, and we regulate it for the 30 million Texans who own that minerals underneath the ground, make sure that they are protected, and the bad actors like these, that's who we're in charge to go after. That's what government is for, enforcing the law.
Right, and let's give some more positive notes then, because obviously Texas is a big home for investment, and why would people listening to this show want to come to Texas and get involved in the opportunity here?
Lots of reasons. I think I read this morning there had been like 600,000 people leave the state of California in the last few years. And they nearly all have come to Texas. Why? Because we believe in a free market, open society that we do not regulate to any large an extent as, say, California does. We do not pass laws that says you can't go into business or work against business, free market. They come here. We don't have an income tax, a state income tax. We are pro-work, and the reason is our legislature believes our job so far, and the Railroad Commission that I'm a part of, believes our job is not to tell business people what to do, is we want them to try to work, try to start a business, do everything we can and stay out of their way. Don't tax them out of business. But, again, as I just stated, if it's a bad actor, our job is then to go in and, get them straight or shut them down. That's the policing job of government. But we don't get in the way of the startup and the successful businesses. We try to encourage that in Texas, and that's a different environment. And I hope we can keep that in Texas by keeping it under the control that it is.
And this estimate of 200 billion barrels, for how long will this be coming out of the ground? I mean, will this take 30 years? What sort of time frame are we talking about?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the time is, but you're exactly right. It'll be decades. We're talking grandchildren and great-grandchildren here. And what's amazing today is people say, well, golly, I remember when Jimmy Carter, and we had the shutdown from OPEC back in the 70s, and we went on rationing, and there were lines at the gas pump, and Jimmy Carter got on television and told us we need to turn our thermostats up during the summertime, and we were going to run out of oil in 8 years. Well, understand, many of these environmental extremist groups, I'll say, that are against oil and gas production altogether and want to have winds and solar panels, which, by the way, can never, by scientific fact, produce over 15% of the electric needs of the world. Winds and solar, just by physics, they can't, and you can research that.
Sure.
So right now, oil and gas, and mostly natural gas, is our source. But Jimmy Carter said 8 years, and now it's, like I'm saying, 3 decades. There's a combination of reasons. Number one, the oil and gas has always been in the ground. Why didn't we know it was there? Well, it was the technology was not available at Jimmy Carter's day to access that oil and gas. The shale play, fracking, horizontal drilling, All these are human technology. And what you'll find, some of these organizations that are talking about running out of oil and gas and how we've got to get to other sources, they use models. And models, when they put in their computer, they say, if this and if that and if this, what would be the result? That's a model where they direct what's going to happen by the scenario by which you draw up the plan. That's a model. Check this out, this is fact, every one of the environmental models they have done over the years, including Al Gore's Inconvenient Change or whatever movie he had, every one of their models yes, every one of their models have been proven wrong. That's phenomenal, 100%. Because what do they not take into consideration? Two things. History is a different way of looking, and that's what scientists look at. They look at what's the history and how does that chart for the future. That's not what the models do. The models say, if this and if that and if this were the situation, this is what's going to occur, and then they advertise the panic they have created in these models. Instead, if you look at the history of what has happened in history and how that projects future, plus the unknown factor that they never use in the climate change movement, is human technology. If you don't use human technology, it's like the smog alerts I was telling you about. It's like we would still have 8 million gallons in the 8 years of gas in the ground and oil. We now have 200 billion barrels out just in West Texas. Why? Because human technology must be a factor when you project in the future.
But before we finish up, I want to note to listeners that we actually have a special which you want to follow up on. It's just goldnewsletter.com/bonus and get Brian London's top 2 mining stock picks and access to the Golden Opportunities newsletter. We've been speaking with Wayne Christian. He is the Texas Railroad Commissioner, an elected position, and he was unanimously reelected. Now, Wayne, how can people best follow your work or see you elsewhere after they've heard you here and want to learn more about what you're doing?
Well, they can call my office is one way to not get efficient use. I should have my website here, but if you would just simply Google Wayne Christian.
You can access to his material on the Golden Newsletter podcast archive. It is rrc.state.tx.us, and we'll insert that into the page. Otherwise, Wayne, I appreciate what you're doing, and I now am a resident of Texas too, so I'm excited about the future here. Thanks so much.
Hey, look forward to working with you, and thank you for the good work that you do and getting the message out there, and it's just most appreciated.
Excellent. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.